Okay, we're going to get at it today and talk about Sino-American relations. If you haven't already checked out the two videos on Sino-Soviet relations, you might want to do those now, but we're going to rewind the clock in the same way we did with those and go back to the Second World War. And during World War II, the United States does have contact and support of both factions of the Chinese Civil War in their fight against Japan. But most of that support is entering into Zheng Jiexi's Kuomintang Nationalist Party. Following the war, Zheng and the nationalist government were given a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, along with Britain and France and the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States will continue to support the GMD in the aftermath of World War II once the Civil War resumed, but you'll remember that America's primary focus during these early years of the Cold War was what was going on in Europe, much along the same lines of the Soviet Union. Following the victory of Mao and the communists, the United States would refuse to recognize the People's Republic of China as a legitimate state, while recognizing Zheng Jiexi's nationalist government on Taiwan. And that Republic of China in Taiwan was granted the United Nations Security Council seat. Now, as we move through the 1950s, we're going to see a few events that increase tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. First, between the United States and China, pardon me. First, in Tibet. Now, Tibet was historically a part of the Chinese dynasties, like the Qing dynasty. But since the breakup of the Qing dynasty, Tibet has run as an autonomous region. In October of 1950, the People's Liberation Army, that's the military of the People's Republic of China, invaded Tibet to bring that region into the political fold of the communists. And it was formally annexed into the People's Republic of China. The United States condemned China for expansionism and for atrocities that the Chinese were accused of committing within Tibet. The Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, was forced to flee Tibet, and he considered Mao's actions there cultural genocide. The Korean War certainly escalates tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The US sees Mao Zedong and his support of Kim Il-sung as this Korean War is a joint venture between Kim, obviously, and Stalin and Mao. The Soviet Union's boycott of the United Nations Security Council would ensure that the UN would support military action on the Korean Peninsula. Remember, Joseph Stalin wanted a war on the Korean Peninsula that could tie up both the United States and China. Mao will condemn American actions in Korea, calling them aggressors and imperialist invaders, and warning the United States not to push into the north. In October of 1950, as the United States did push UN forces over the 38th parallel, the People's Republic of China declared war and ultimately entered the Korean Peninsula. After 3 years of fighting, the PLA would lose hundreds of thousands of men and incurred tremendous debt to the Soviet Union. Remember, that was a part of the issue that's exacerbating the tensions between the Soviets and the Chinese. By the end of the Korean War, what are the results? Well, the United States, who was initially reluctant to offer long-term support for Taiwan, now will pledge themselves to Taiwan's defense. Tension between the United States and the People's Republic of China is absolutely at a high point. The PRC was weakened by the war, both economically, those debts that they have to repay, and militarily. It was a tremendously costly war. Mao was emboldened by what he saw as a defeat of the United States by Chinese forces. And of course, this causes a rift between the Soviets and the Chinese. And now we point to Taiwan. This is where the Kuomintang nationalists of Zheng Jiexi set up their government of the Republic of China in the aftermath of the Civil War. Prior to the Korean War, the United States had no desire to establish military bases on Taiwan. But now Taiwan is going to be seen as a key territory of American containment in Asia. The People's Republic of China, for its part, lacked air power and a navy to launch an invasion of Taiwan, so that just wouldn't come. The American 7th Fleet would enter the region to defend Taiwan, and the United States promised to protect Taiwan from outside aggression. Mao Zedong is going to test those waters, both in 1954 and 1958, by opening up rounds of fire on two small islands off the coast of mainland China called Quemoy and Matsu. These were claimed by the Republic of China, Taiwan. President Eisenhower at the time used his brinkmanship policy and threatened massive nuclear retaliation against Mao if he didn't back down. Mao backed down. He tries again in 1958. Again, the United States prepared for war, even the threat of nuclear war, but that full-scale war, of course, never came. So as we push into the 60s, the United States is viewing the People's Republic of China as an expansionist state and is linking it to the domino theory in Southeast Asia. And China is now being viewed as a direct threat of the security of the West and Western allies. And the United States is gonna employ a containment policy against China. We're gonna have a trade embargo against the People's Republic of China. The United States will continue to obstruct the People's Republic of China's entry into the United Nations. There will be huge military and economic aid from the United States to Taiwan. Remember, in the aftermath of the Korean War, the United States will organize Sino, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which creates a regional containment bloc, much like NATO was doing in Europe. And then finally, the United States is going to sign a number of bilateral, two-party defense treaties with other Asian states in the region. Now, as we move into the 1960s, the United States policy of containment and isolation of the People's Republic of China will continue. The US would use Mao's failures in the Great Leap Forward to highlight the problems of China and the failures of Marxism. The People's Republic of China will persist in its demands for Taiwan, though no 1958 scale tensions are going to resume. China will also condemn American involvement in Vietnam, once again as aggressive imperialism from the West, and they will provide material support to the North Vietnamese. The People's Republic of China will also support decolonization movements in Africa and elsewhere, hoping to replace the Soviet Union as the leader of international communism. As we turn to the 1970s, we enter the détente period of the Cold War, this easing of tensions by both the United States, the Soviet Union, and as we'll see here, China. So with the United States looking for détente in the Cold War, we will try to foster some better relationships with China. What's the rationale there? Well, China could give Nixon some help in exiting Vietnam. Remember, China was giving material support to the North Vietnamese. So if they would ask or request the North Vietnamese to accept a negotiated end, maybe the North would listen. The United States hoped that better relations with China would also pressure an American-Soviet détente. President Nixon wanted to make history. He wanted to create a legacy for himself. All presidents want to do this, and maybe better relations with China could do that. The public wanted more constructive and less military strategies following the Vietnam War. The United States was tired of war. And China, of course, now by the mid-1960s, they have nuclear weapons and they have long-range missiles. And this changes the equation. Now China really enters the mutually assured destruction conversation. You can't get into a conflict with China because you both have nuclear weapons. Also, détente could help reduce American military commitments in Asia, not just in Vietnam, but all of those other nations that the United States has been supporting. Possibly we can draw down our spending in Asia. For China, they of course see the Soviet Union as their main rival, and reduced tensions with the United States might be able to strengthen China in regards to the Soviets. China could also gain some foreign policy concessions, also better trading deals with the West, which could help economically. Détente would be temporary for the Chinese, hopefully playing their enemies off of each other. And this new period of détente could improve China's international standing, especially when viewed by newly decolonized third world nations. So how does this détente develop? Interestingly enough, it starts with a ping pong tournament where the American ping pong team is going to be able to travel to China in an exhibition with the Chinese. And while this ping pong tournament is taking place, American and Chinese diplomats will meet behind closed doors that open the door for future meetings between higher level officials like Henry Kissinger and his Chinese counterpart, Zhou Enlai. The results of these meetings will be ease trade restrictions. In 1971, the United Nations and the Security Council will each recognize and accept the People's Republic of China, while the Republic of China, Taiwan, will lose its recognition, and going forward, a one China official policy is born. President Nixon will also take a visit to China in 1972, being the first American president to do so. The United States supported a slow move towards reunification between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan. China would later receive full diplomatic and normalized relations with the United States under President Carter. The US would stop arms sales to Taiwan in 1979. But in 1980, with the election of Ronald Reagan, who took a harder line towards communism, this new relationship and détente between the United States and China would be threatened. And Reagan did resume arms sales and a promise of protection for Taiwan. Through the 1980s, despite Ronald Reagan's rhetoric, the relationship with China never returned to the tensions we saw in the 1960s or before. The US, though, would protest and condemn human rights violations in China, especially surrounding the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. There would be no diplomatic isolation or sanctions resulting from that, however. The United States was too economically invested in China at this point. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, China will become the dominant power in the Western Pacific and lead communist nations there and elsewhere. Chinese leadership would focus in the future on economic development, though, rather than leading violent international communist revolutions, as Mao often talked about in the 60s and before. China would gain most favored nation status with the United States in 1992, the highest trading partner recognition that the United States can offer. And this was made permanent by the year 2000. So there we have it, and we will catch you back with more on détente in our next video. Take care.